The Weight of Chosen Love. Sophie, your sister is pregnant. You need to give up Ryan for her. My mother's words landed like acid in my chest. Surprise didn't rise, only nausea and a hot, hollow disgust that had been building for years. I had prepared for this moment without knowing it, the way you prepare for a storm you can smell on the wind. I swept the plates off the table, porcelain shattering against the floor like everything else in this house. I left without looking back, though I could hear Chloe's manufactured sobs beginning behind me. Do people sometimes love someone else's child more than their own? Yes. I am living proof. My name is Sophie Miller, and until I was 14, I believed I understood what love looked like. My parents held steady middle management positions at private companies, dad in accounting, mom in human resources. We weren't wealthy, but we had Sunday dinners around a table that belonged to us, Christmas mornings where I was the center of someone's universe, and quiet evenings where my mother would braid my hair while humming off-key. That world ended the winter my mother brought Chloe Harrison into our house. Sophie, my mother said, her voice strained and theatrical in a way I'd never heard before. Aunt Sarah and Uncle Mike have been missing for 5 days. The police think. Well, they think something terrible has happened. Chloe will be staying with us. Chloe stood beside her, clutching a garbage bag of clothes, sobbing with the kind of desperate performance that made adults melt. Aunt Linda, I wouldn't have come if I had anywhere else to go. I know I'm a burden. At 14, I possessed the cruel clarity that comes before politeness teaches you to lie to yourself. I didn't want her there. I knew, with the certainty of a child who understands pack dynamics, that her presence would change everything. I also knew that my wanting wouldn't matter. I was right. Chloe wanted everything I had, but more than that, she wanted my mother's attention, and she understood how to get it. Every visit to my room became a performance, pressing her face to my clothes, my books, my piano, looking at my mother with those wide, pleading eyes. Sophie is so lucky, she would whisper, just loud enough. I'll never have things like this. My parents. And she would trail off, letting the tragedy speak for itself. Aunt Sarah and Uncle Mike had worked at the textile factory on the edge of town. They lived paycheck to paycheck in a trailer park where the rent was cheap and the walls were thin. They couldn't afford much beyond necessities, and Chloe had learned early that want, properly displayed, could become currency. My mother couldn't stand that look of longing. Every time, without fail, she would tell Chloe, "What's Sophie's is yours, sweetheart," and she never asked me. When I protested, and I did, loudly and desperately at first, my mother would scold me with increasing sharpness. Sarah was my sister, Sophie. That makes Chloe your sister too. Don't be selfish. She's been through enough. So I learned the progression. Loud protest led to punishment, quiet resignation earned pity, and numbness brought peace. My mother would pat my head during my numb phases and tell visitors, "Sophie's learning to care for her sister." It felt like a verdict being read. The room was the final straw. "Aunt Linda," Chloe said one evening, her voice careful and sweet, "where will I sleep? I'm starting high school and I'll need to study late. I might disturb Sophie with my lamp." Our house had been chosen for a family of 3, 1 bedroom for my parents, 1 for me, and a small balcony that my mother had converted into a reading nook. There was no guest room because we'd never needed one. "If you don't want to room with me," I said, my patience finally fraying, "you can sleep on the balcony." Chloe's tears started immediately, perfect drops that caught the kitchen light. My mother's resolve crumbled in real time. "Oh, don't cry, sweetheart. Sophie will move to the balcony. The reading nook has that lovely window seat. It'll be like camping." I stared at my mother, feeling something fundamental shift inside my chest. First my clothes, then my toys, then my piano time, and now my room. Each thing taken had been accompanied by the same refrain about Chloe's suffering, about my selfishness. about family obligations. My protests had become background noise, easily dismissed. When my father came home that evening and learned about the room swap, he asked exactly one question. Does Sophie mind? Is less than #0. 6 is greater than, my mother answered before I could. She's being very mature about it. He nodded and never spoke about it again. After Chloe moved into my room, my former room, the house tilted completely toward her gravitational pull. Meals matched her preferences. She claimed to have a sensitive stomach that couldn't handle spice, so our dinners became bland and beige. She wore the name-brand clothes my mother bought for both of us, while I wore whatever was left from discount stores. When I complained about the unfairness, I met the same worn response. Chloe has been through enough trauma, Sophie. Can't you be understanding? Understanding. As if understanding would make the balcony warmer in winter, or make the street noise quieter at night, or give me back the feeling of being wanted in my own home. By my junior year, I had researched every boarding school within a 3-hour radius. When I presented my case to my parents, my mother's concern focused not on missing me, but on practical objections she framed as worry. The dormitories are so crowded, and the food is probably terrible. You wouldn't be comfortable. I pressed my reasons with the desperation of someone drowning. The balcony was freezing in winter. The street noise made it impossible to study. My grades were suffering from lack of sleep. Finally, I spoke everything I'd been swallowing for 2 years. This isn't about comfort, I said. This is about having a place where I belong. I haven't felt wanted in this house since Chloe arrived, and I can't pretend anymore that I don't notice. Her eyes filled with tears, the same quick tears that Chloe had perfected. Are you blaming me? She asked, her voice breaking. How can you blame me for loving a child who has no one? Do you know how hard I've worked to take care of both of you? You've been working hard for Chloe, I said quietly. I've been an afterthought. The slap came fast, leaving my cheek burning and my eyes watering. She immediately began the familiar litany. Chloe was pitiful. She had lost her parents. I needed to understand what sacrifice meant. I said nothing more. I had already said enough. Boarding school became my salvation. For the first time in years, I could breathe without measuring each breath against someone else's need. I had a bed that was mine, belongings that stayed where I put them, and friends who knew me as Sophie, not Sophie who should be more understanding. Then, during my senior year, Chloe announced she wanted to study abroad. She hadn't done well on college entrance exams, too much time spent on her appearance and social life, not enough on academics. The local community colleges weren't prestigious enough for someone who had grown accustomed to being special. My mother agreed to fund her overseas education without a moment's hesitation. That decision immediately shifted our family's financial priorities. Money will be tighter now, my mother explained to me during one of our monthly phone calls. The boarding school meal plan is so expensive, and with Chloe's living expenses, you should consider coming home. I found a job at a 24-hour diner near school, underage and underpaid, working the overnight shift that left me exhausted during classes. I saved every dollar I could, bread and peanut butter for most meals, walking instead of taking the bus, buying textbooks 3 editions old. When I needed $600 for SAT prep materials, I asked my parents for help. My mother's response was swift and cutting. $600? Do you know Chloe's living expenses are almost $10,000 a month? We're already stretched thin. I stopped asking for anything after that. The test prep materials came from shaving away what little I had left, skipping meals entirely some days, sleeping 4 hours a night to work extra shifts. I was thin and exhausted, but I was determined to earn my way out. That's when Ryan Liu entered my life. I first noticed him in AP Chemistry, sitting 2 rows ahead with the kind of easy confidence that comes from never having to prove you belong. He was effortlessly smart, naturally athletic, and surrounded by the kind of friends who assumed the world would bend to accommodate them. One Tuesday in March, I found a lunchbox on my desk, 4 carefully packed containers with rice, vegetables, soup, and what looked like homemade dumpling. The smell made my empty stomach clench with hunger. "This isn't mine," I said, trying to hand it back to him. "Not for free," he said, his eyes serious despite his casual tone, "is less than #0. 6# is greater than I need a tutor for calculus." Trade? Pride made me hesitate. I had been surviving on vending machine crackers for 3 days, but accepting felt like admitting how desperate I had become. "I'll bring lunch every day," he continued. 3 meals, actually. "You look like you could use them." The kindness in his voice broke through my defenses. I was 17 years old, working 30 hours a week on top of a full course load, and I hadn't had a proper meal in weeks. Someone was offering not just food, but care. As I ate, I cried a mixture of shame at being seen so clearly and relief at being helped without judgment. For the first time in years, someone had noticed that I was struggling and had chosen to step in. Ryan's tutoring sessions became the highlight of my weeks. He was genuinely interested in learning, never making me feel like charity case. He brought elaborate lunches, his family's housekeeper prepared, always packing extra and never mentioning my obvious hunger. We studied calculus, but we also talked about books, about college plans, about everything except why a girl with straight A's was working night shifts at a diner. His academic improvement was dramatic, from C to A in 2 months. My own grades, buoyed by regular nutrition and Ryan's steady friendship, reached new heights. We made a promise that felt sacred. At 17, we would both get into Harvard. We would meet at the top. On the athletic field one evening, as the sun set red behind the school buildings, he took my hand and said, "Sophie, see you at the top." It was naive and romantic and everything I needed to believe in. I applied only to Harvard. Confidence and love had made me reckless. Acceptance letters arrived in March. I opened mine with shaking hands, already imagining the phone call to Ryan, the celebration we had planned. The letter was from Columbia. I had never applied to Columbia. I stared at the letterhead until the words blurred. Someone had changed my application. Only one person had access to my college portal login information. I had given it to my mother months earlier when she insisted on helping with financial aid forms. Why? I confronted her that evening, my voice shaking with fury. "Why would you change my application?" She went pale, confirming what I already knew. "Sophie, I had no choice. Chloe's expenses abroad are higher than we anticipated, and there was this opportunity." "What opportunity?" She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Madison Liu offered us $50,000 if you went to Columbia instead of Harvard." The room spun. Madison Liu, Ryan's mother's business partner, the woman whose daughter had been infatuated with Ryan since middle school. The woman who saw me as an obstacle to her matchmaking plans. "You sold my future," I said, the words coming out flat and cold. "For $50,000, you sold my future." "It's not like that," my mother protested. "Columbia is a wonderful school. This won't ruin your life, Sophie." Chloe needs, I repeated. "What about what I need? What about what I've worked for?" She began the familiar refrain about Chloe being pitiful and needing help, about family obligations and sacrifice. I told her exactly what I thought. She had become a stranger to me, someone who would sacrifice her own daughter for money and the approval of others. I left that kitchen planning to sever ties completely. But then came October, and Ryan appeared outside Columbia's gates. He had taken a bus from Boston, missing classes to find me. "Don't abandon me," he begged, tears in his eyes. "I don't care about Harvard without you. We can make this work." I collapsed in his arms and sobbed for the mother I had lost, for the dreams that had been sold, for the exhaustion of carrying so much alone. He held me and promised we would build something better together. He began visiting every weekend, taking the bus between Boston and New York. I wrote freelance articles and earned enough to live on. When winter break came, my mother called. "Sophie, will you come home for New Year?" "No," I said. I had work deadlines and no desire to see Chloe's face across our dinner table. She tried to guilt me about money, about missed family time. I provoked her deliberately. "Call Chloe and tell her to come back from her expensive adventure. She can provide you with the family time you're missing." Silence. Then a weary, "Take care of yourself." Senior year brought unexpected success. One of my short stories went viral online, leading to a book deal and television rights. The advance was enough to pay off my loans and buy a small house in our hometown with cash. Ryan was prouder of my success than I was. He introduced me to his parents with genuine joy, and they welcomed me warmly despite the complicated history. Near New Year, my mother called again. "Chloe's back from studying abroad. Come home for dinner?" Something in her voice made me think that maybe, finally, she was ready to choose me. I agreed, partly for Ryan's sake, and partly because I still, despite everything, loved the woman who had braided my hair and hummed off-key. At dinner, Chloe immediately began her performance hovering over Ryan's bowl with her chopsticks, giggling at his polite responses, touching his arm while telling stories about her adventures abroad. I watched my mother smile indulgently at this display. "My boyfriend doesn't like being served by other women," I said, pushing Chloe's hand away from Ryan's bowl. The words came out sharper than I intended. My father slammed his hand on the table. "Enough. We're family here." Later, as I helped clear dishes, my mother approached me with the careful voice she used for difficult conversations. "Sophie," she began, "would you consider letting your sister have Ryan?" The dish I was holding nearly slipped from my hands. "Excuse me?" "She's pregnant," my mother continued, as if that explained everything. "She needs a stable man, someone with a good future. Ryan has always been kind to her. That's when I lost control completely." I swept the remaining dishes off the table, slapped Chloe hard enough to leave a mark, and screamed everything I had kept inside for years. How had I earned a lifetime of being second choice? Was I somehow responsible for every tragedy that had befallen Chloe? Why was my happiness always the price of someone else's comfort? "I am disgusted," I told them all. "Disgusted by this family and what you've become." My mother flailed desperately. "I'm your mother." "Are you?" I asked. "Because mothers are supposed to protect their children, not sacrifice them. Mothers are supposed to love their children, not trade them for money and approval." She struck me then, harder than she had when I was 16. I told her coldly that I wished she had never given birth to me, that she had forfeited the right to call herself my mother years ago. Ryan found me on the street afterward, crying so hard I could barely breathe. He held me and said, "It's okay, Sophie. I'm here. I choose you. I will always choose you." That night, my father, who had been silent through so many years of this dynamic, sent me 2 transfers of $50,000 each and a message, "I saved this for your wedding. Watch your mother from now on." I didn't accept the money. I closed the chat and hoped for no more contact. 2 months later, my mother called from an unknown number. "Sophie, come to General Hospital. Your father is dying." I almost didn't go. The urge to let them handle their crisis without me was overwhelming. But I thought of the money he had tried to give me, the years of silent regret in his eyes, and I went. The hospital waiting room was crowded with faces I hadn't seen in years. My mother, crying with theatrical desperation. Chloe, visibly pregnant and clinging to Aunt Sarah's arm. Aunt Sarah and Uncle Mike, returned from whatever disappearance had started this whole saga years ago. My father lay pale and furious in the hospital bed, muttering one word over and over, "Divorce." Aunt Sarah explained what had triggered his collapse. Chloe was pregnant, and the father's family demanded she bring a house to the marriage as dowry. My mother had agreed to sell their home and move everyone into a new house together, one big happy family funded by my parents' life savings. "You agreed to this," I said to my mother, not bothering to hide my disgust. She stammered that Chloe needed security to get married, that the baby needed a stable home. I offered her a bargain that cut through all the manipulation. "Fine. Sell the house. But only if you divorce Dad first and legally sever all ties with me. Let Chloe support you in your old age since she's so important to you. I owe you nothing." My mother recoiled as if I had struck her. She couldn't agree, couldn't give up the safety net of my father's pension and my potential future support for Chloe's uncertain promises. Chloe left with Aunt Sarah and Uncle Mike that same day, off to find another solution to her pregnancy problem. When Dad was discharged, my mother begged me to stay for dinner, to try to rebuild what we had lost. I looked at her, really looked, and saw a woman who had spent years choosing other people's needs over her own daughter's well-being. A woman who had sold my dreams, sacrificed my childhood, and asked me to give up my love, all in service of someone else's child. "You once cared for me gently," I said. "But that woman is gone. I don't want to see you again. Don't contact me. Don't offer compensation or apologies. Just let me go." She cried. My father sighed with what might have been relief, and I left them both behind. Ryan's story. I married the girl I had admired since I was 17, the brilliant, fierce woman who survived on bread and determination while maintaining perfect grades. I had approached her with a lunchbox and a simple request: tutor me, and I'll make sure you eat. What I didn't tell her then was that I had been watching her for months, seeing how thin she was getting, how she fell asleep over her textbooks, how she worked overnight shifts while other kids partied. I had been raised with privilege, but I recognized strength when I saw it. She never asked about my background or my family's money. She just needed someone to treat her well, to see her worth, to choose her consistently. That felt like the easiest thing in the world. Her parents weren't at our wedding. I saw them standing outside the venue afterward, looking uncertain and unwelcome. I invited them in, not for her, but because I hoped they might finally understand what they had lost. They declined. I came back to Sophie and our friends and promised to keep building the life she deserved, the life she had worked so hard to create. She deserved everything good that came her way, and more. Linda's story. The mother. I watched my daughter's room shrink into a balcony, and every time I made the choice to prioritize Chloe, my chest ached with guilt I couldn't acknowledge. When Chloe first arrived, sobbing and orphaned, I thought Sophie would adapt. Sophie had always been resilient, independent, easier than other children. Chloe was obviously broken, needy, desperate for the stability Sophie took for granted. I told myself I was teaching Sophie compassion, sacrifice, the values that make good people. I told myself that Sophie would understand when she was older, that she would be grateful for the lesson in putting others' needs first. I didn't realize the cost until my husband threatened divorce and my daughter refused to see me. By then, the pattern was too entrenched to break easily. Every conversation with Sophie became defensive. Every interaction filtered through years of resentment and hurt. When Madison Liu offered money for changing Sophie's college application, I told myself it was practical. Sophie would thrive anywhere, and we desperately needed the funds for Chloe's education. I told myself Columbia was just as good as Harvard, that Sophie was being dramatic about her disappointment. I was lying to myself about everything. When Chloe came back pregnant and demanding that Sophie give up Ryan, I should have been horrified. Instead, I found myself automatically making the request, falling back into the pattern of asking Sophie to sacrifice for Chloe's needs. The look on Sophie's face when I asked pure disgust mixed with heartbreak finally broke through my self-deception. I saw myself as she saw me, a woman who had systematically chosen another person's child over her own, who had traded her daughter's happiness for the approval of others, who had become someone unrecognizable. Now I sit with the consequences of those choices. My husband barely speaks to me. My daughter has built a successful life that doesn't include me. Chloe disappeared again when I couldn't provide what she wanted, leaving me with nothing but regret and the memory of Sophie's face when she said she wished I had never given birth to her. I call her number sometimes, just to hear her voice on the voicemail recording. I follow her career from a distance, reading her published stories and interviews, proud of accomplishments I didn't support and success I tried to undermine. I wonder if she will forgive me when I'm dying. I wonder if she'll let me meet her children someday. I wonder if love can survive the weight of so many wrong choices. I don't know the answers, but I know I earned the silence that surrounds me now. Epilogue. 5 years later, Sophie's house sits on a quiet street lined with oak trees, their leaves turning gold in the October light. Through the kitchen window, she can see Ryan building a treehouse for their 3-year-old daughter Emma, who supervises from below with the serious expression she inherited from her mother. Sophie is pregnant again, a son this time, due in spring. She rests her hand on her belly and thinks about the kind of mother she wants to be, the kind of love that doesn't require anyone else to sacrifice or step aside. The doorbell rings. Through the peephole, she sees her father standing on the porch, older and grayer than when she last saw him. He's alone. She opens the door. "Your mother doesn't know I'm here," he says. "She never will, if that's what you want." Sophie studies his face, the man who stayed silent through so many crucial moments, who finally found his voice when it was almost too late. "What do you want?" she asks. "To meet my granddaughter," he says simply. "To apologize. To tell you that I should have protected you, and I didn't, and I've regretted it every day since." Emma appears at Sophie's side, curious about the stranger. She has Sophie's dark eyes and Ryan's easy confidence, a child who has never doubted that she is wanted. "Who is this?" Emma asks. Sophie looks down at her daughter, then at her father. Some wounds heal. Some don't. Some relationships can be rebuilt on new foundations, and others are too damaged by neglect and betrayal to survive. "This is your grandfather," Sophie says finally. "He's here to visit." She steps aside to let him in, not because she has forgiven everything, but because Emma deserves to know her grandfather's love, the love he was too weak to give consistently to Sophie, but that he might be strong enough to give purely to his granddaughter. Love, Sophie has learned, is not about fairness or justice. It's about choices made daily, moment by moment. It's about who you choose to protect, whose needs you prioritize, whose happiness you celebrate. In her kitchen, watching her father meet Emma for the first time, Sophie makes a choice to let love be complicated, to let healing be imperfect, to let her daughter have what she can give without sacrificing what she needs to protect. Some wounds heal. Some don't. But life continues, and love finds a way to grow in the spaces left by loss.